welcome to the ICT Pulse podcast. I'm Michelle Marius, your host and the editor and publisher of ICT Pulse, the online platform where we discuss ICT issues from a Caribbean perspective. Welcome to our July 2019 community chat. I can't believe that half the year has gone already. Joining me today are Liselle Yorke, who we had on our March 2019 community chat and is originally from Trinidad and Tobago, but currently lives in the US, where she's a communications specialist and has written extensively on the technology for development scene. And we also have Shannon Clarke, who is based in Barbados and is a software developer and the CEO of CarePoint Solutions, which is a messaging and workflow management platform for the healthcare industry. Liselle and Shannon, welcome.
Thank you so much, Michelle. Good to be back.
Thank you so much, Michelle, and hello as well to the ICT Pulse community.
Okay, so in this community chat, we'll be discussing two topics. First, can technology help or hurt local cultures, which Liselle submitted for discussion? And the second topic is implementing Tech4Good projects to drive digital transformation, which Shannon would guide us through. So, Liselle, you're up. Can technology help or hurt local cultures? This topic is one that has been debated widely for several years. That is, how technology may be hindering or undermining local cultures. ICT continues to develop at a rapid pace, and whether we like it or not, or even realize it, our attitudes and behavior has also been changing. So, Liselle, why do you want us to discuss this issue now?
Thank you, Michelle. Once again, the topic I chose is sort of ripped from the headlines, this one more literally than the last time I was on. So we are in the middle of the Tobago Heritage Festival, which is a 2-week expo that celebrates the traditions and culture of Tobago. And it's one of the things I enjoy, seeing at home as well. And so the opening night was on the 12th, so about 10 days ago. And at that time, the Secretary for Culture, Tourism, and Transportation in the Tobago House of Assembly, a woman by the name of Nadine Stewart Phillips, talked about the potential harmful effects of technology. And she spoke about it in the context of modernization drawing us away from our local roots. And, if we're looking at the flashy screen, is that a distraction away from our traditional dance or traditional drama and our attire? And it just sparked a huge backlash in some corners. And in fact, the headline of one of the newspapers was that technology harmful to Tobago culture, THA culture secretary warns, which does not capture the nuance of what she talked about. And so I think there is a tension between how we embrace technology, because it's all around us, so we have to, but how we still try to hold on to our local traditions and customs, and how can we use technology to further advance and embrace them, and what do we need to be mindful of. So, that's why I brought this topic to the fore today, because I think it's an important one for us in the Caribbean. We have very unique and distinct cultures, and are we in danger of losing that, as our young people become more and more enamored of Western culture?
Shannon, you want to jump in before I share my thoughts?
Oh, yeah, certainly. So I actually think it's very interesting that here in the Caribbean, we would have that, I guess, distinction between potential productivity in terms of the use of technology versus a distraction caused by same technology. What we have within the Caribbean islands, I think from Barbados, Trinidad, Jamaica, right throughout, is really trending towards more than 100% mobile penetration. But what we may be lacking is that a lack of development in terms of actual solutions for regional or local issues, such as, for instance, our e-government, the long lines that we usually face within our banking systems, even our access to social services, versus our use of entertainment platforms such as Snapchat, Instagram, and Facebook. So I totally understand where the zeal is coming from, and perhaps even why the backlash even happened over that comment itself. Maybe what we need then is really connecting some of our ICT companies or even software developers with the necessary stakeholders in order to actually create relevant solutions.
Okay. As for me, though, I am wondering whether sometimes we are mixing up heritage with culture. Culture is current, what we do every day, the way of life of a people today. And the heritage speaks more to our history and traditions and that sort of thing. And, today being, we are in the 21st century, we do not live as we did in the 18th century. And therefore, while I think there needs to be a recognition and appreciation of our heritage, I wonder sometimes whether or not we are looking to romanticize, I guess, our traditions, our heritage, and use technology almost as a scapegoat for it, where when I think the whole developmental spectrum has forced us to evolve along the way.
Sure, let me respond to that because I hear where you're coming from, but I do see the value of holding on to heritage. The Tobago Heritage Festival has been around for 32 years. It's a moneymaker. So there is an economic interest in trying to preserve parts of your heritage to use them as an economic driver. If that were the case, then we would not have museums. There would be no need for them. So for me, the question comes down to how do you preserve and showcase that heritage, if you want to use that word, and how do you keep those traditions being passed on to younger generations? So if we were to look specifically at the Tobago Heritage Festival, some of the things they do are like the traditional way of cutting saws. They actually of sawing wood. So you have like one guy on top of the wood, one guy below with this long saw, and the plank of wood is put across like two other limbs. So they put a great stock in showcasing this because it's an economic driver. It's the same thing, say, here in the US, where you have people who do reenactments of Civil War battles. Those were many hundred years ago, and you would say, why even do that? But for those people, it's important to showcase that tradition, and it is also an economic driver. So I think that's the tension we face. And so I actually thrown a question out to a small group that I belong to on Facebook, just to get their feedback, so that it's not just my thoughts that I bring here. And one of the points that people made is that the challenge is about local content creation. How would you create those things that, one, help to preserve the culture and tradition, and two, do them in a way that draw in the younger generation so that you can keep this going? So if the Tobago Heritage Festival is to go on for another 5, 10, 15, or 20 years, it has to be the younger people who are picking up the dances and all these things to reenact them as well. So I think that's the tension we face about how do you harness technology in a way that it captures the imagination that they can see it via technology, and how do you ensure that the traditions can continue? So that's the perspective I bring to this.
Okay.
Oh yeah, and if I may chime in, I actually think you're very much in the right direction there, Liselle. And perhaps via applying the technology, we could actually look to how could we transform these experiences for the modern age, or maybe even for the future. For instance, we could actually consider that rather than our tourists or diaspora or even local persons having to travel physically in order to experience the culture, maybe they can experience it remotely using new technologies, or relatively new technologies, such as augmented reality, virtual reality. The things that we can do with even just the basic smartphone nowadays, and not necessarily having to purchase an entire VR headset, is quite amazing. And for instance, if you're discussing like reenactment, for instance, of the Civil War, or if, for instance, we even wanted to actually show a real representation of our forefathers who would have traveled to the Panama Canal, then students can actually not only just read about it or even just see a normal video about it, but actually get a totally immersive and maybe an overview of the actual experience, seeing the Panama Canal as it was, like perhaps via time lapse, as it was developed over a period of time to where it is now.
Absolutely. I think one of the issues I'm grappling with is that to a considerable degree, we have been using technology to help us to document our culture and our heritage, because some of it sadly has already died out for various reasons. And whether or not it was before we had ICT, but being able to record the oral traditions or film certain reenactments of certain things or certain festivals, or events that were happening in various communities, which to some degree in some of our countries across the region has helped us to keep the culture that we have. I'm thinking, though, that there are two elements. There's the technology that one can use to help to document and to help to market and create the content that might appeal to whether it is our citizens who we want to appreciate our culture and be able to exhibit it and demonstrate it at appropriate times, and whether for the non-citizen who you also want to appreciate it and recognize it and probably to find ways of leveraging it to generate revenue for the country is certainly another option. But then I think there's also the element or the aspect of what system does a country put in place to help its citizens take pride in their heritage, which may not necessarily be a technology issue.
Okay, if I may chime in there, I'm not a tourism expert, but in Barbados we have the common saying that tourism is all of our business. and as part of that, one of the things that is done is that in order to encourage everyone playing their part in tourism is actually experiential tourism. I think that's the right way to pronounce that word. And essentially it's creating these physical experiences for the tourists to get onto, whether it's a hike itself, whether it's going to the fish market and seeing how the fishermen do their trade, or even, let's say, going to Harrison Cave, one of our points of interest. But we do tend to have a disconnect in between when the tourists themselves are arriving, whether it's via plane or if it's via ship. How do they discover these experiences? So I think you're absolutely correct, Michelle. It's a bit of both. One is in terms of discovery, and then ultimately allowing the actual tourists and the locals as well to then be exposed to this more directly, maybe even in a more tactile sense. And that's when the culture really passes on. And so then I think that where technology really would excel is really in allowing the tourists to be able to discover these experiences and see why they're different, so that then they'll be willing to actually leave maybe from their all-inclusive, maybe from the cruise ships, for instance, and then come and experience it firsthand. How does this actually generate into revenue? Well, within the Caribbean, I know definitely in Barbados, we've had issues in terms of tourist spend. We're still grappling with that, and to some extent, we're starting to make strides in that area. But certainly, if we have discovery happening via virtual, then it could be connected with a booking engine or even international booking engines, and then you can see how the revenue could start coming in.
I mean, I love those ideas, and I think you're both right in that, especially where you talked about it, Shannon, about experiential learning, because everything can't be virtual. There's some things that you need to touch and experience, and so that's why I think, as you said, technology can best be seen as a gateway. So it could be the first point of entry for that person who needs to come from abroad to come to visit our islands or communities, because face it, I mean, across the Caribbean, our selling points are all sand, sea, and sun. And so to differentiate ourselves, we're going to have to show something different. that gives me a reason to leave London, New York, or wherever I'm coming from to come to your particular country. And so the discovery there could be the gateway that leads us in. I think there is an important educational role that technology can play. One of the more interesting comments I got from my Facebook group is one person who talked about CSEC and the way that Caribbean history is taught, to students who are preparing to take that exam for Caribbean history, and she just wondered if there was a way to infuse more of us in the curriculum, and that can be done through technology as well. And then just your basic preservation. The reason we go to museums and keep going is because they help us see what life was back then. We get to touch it, we get to feel it, and I think that's an important thing as well. So I think for me, those are the three ways in which technology can help. And I think at the end of the day, like I always say, technology is a tool. It doesn't replace things. So I still think there is the need for people to touch and taste things. And it's just a matter of how you get them to that point.
Oh, yes. If you don't mind, maybe I could just share one example in terms of content creation that I found to be a bit novel, but also very simple in execution. Now, we're very familiar with the use of VR sets and even 360 cameras, relatively new technology for instance, tours of real estate spaces, or maybe even larger spaces like cityscapes, such as Google Street View, for instance. But there's a local software developer in Barbados, and I just speak to what I know. I'm sure there are many others. And what he's done is that he's taken these tours underwater. So he's taken it underwater, so you actually have not only beach landscapes, but seascapes as well. And the interesting thing, looking at his statistics, there are many visitors, not from the Caribbean, but from the Middle East, from European states, places where they don't usually get the opportunity to experience seascapes such as ours. And what that has naturally led to is that then those persons, they get a taste of it virtually, and then they want to come and experience it locally. So that's an example of content creation, then leading on to what we've been talking about, actually driving revenue and spending from the tourists by enhancing and providing more value to their overall experience.
That's brilliant.
Question, Shannon, because I guess as we're doing this recording, Barbados is gearing up for its crop over. And I'm wondering, this is a major tourist event, but also a cultural event for Barbados, coming out of the sugarcane harvest experience. So, I mean, what are your sort of perspectives and thoughts in terms of how technology can help and hurt this aspect of the Bajan culture? I mean, here it is that everybody sort of, I think Rihanna is supposed to be coming home for a crop over, and everybody's gearing up, excited to see what her outfit might look like, and, what's going on with her, etc. And so there's going to be a huge spotlight that she's going to bring to Barbados over, the next, several days.
Oh yes. I am the biggest Rihanna fan, so please don't get me started. But yes, Rihanna is coming back, and yes, I'm very, very excited about that. Yes. So right now we're actually in the midst of crop over. Actually, from mid May, especially June, until the first Monday in August is actually our entire crop over season. That Monday is actually our Kadooment Day. That's our carnival period. Now, how has technology helped and how has it hurt? That's a very interesting question. And part of it, unfortunately, leads to some government regulations over time. Now, how it's helped is that there have been some providers, whether it's FET operators, FET being the word that we use for party, usually within the Caribbean. Some FET operators have utilized drone technology to provide aerial views and even tours throughout the actual FETs themselves. And that's actually given the opportunity not only for current patrons, but even those who may just be taking a review of the party itself to get a view of how good the party was, either for that year or the following year. And that's helped to some degree. But what's more interesting, though, is that over maybe last 5 years or so, we had the proliferation of ticketing venues online venues. So I I think you'd be very hard pressed to find a party nowadays that only uses paper tickets. Maybe they have the wristbands, for instance. But the more interesting part of that question was, how is it hurt? Now, unfortunately, it's only locals that would really know about some of our local cultural figures or even our own folklore that has sadly really been lost throughout the years. So, for instance, the Barbados Land Ship, basically a cultural group that represents some of, I guess it's kind of a imitation of the British tradition at that point in time, in terms of how they had smaller sailor groups and smaller ships, maybe for some of the black persons at the time who were not able to join the rail sailor groups. And that was ultimately called Land Ship itself. And what they do is that they actually represent from that period of time through dance and song. Now, those events are not as heavily patronized as they once were. Many persons don't know about the actual story behind the steel donkey, the heartman. Many people don't even know what a duppy is, according to Barbados culture, or even the chase vault. So, speaking to your point, Liselle, it is true. Some elements of culture are lost, but I wouldn't blame technology for that. I would say that we haven't utilized technology in order to preserve that interest, because quite frankly, over previous generations, we would have used the newspaper, we would have used books and different publications, and more recently television. However, and I guess it's actually a support here point, really and truly. However, no content or little content was created along the lines of more traditional folklore that may help it to preserve, to help it migrate from those older mediums into these newer mediums. And as a result, there's a bit of ignorance, not stupidity, but ignorance, lack of knowing about these elements of folklore that in my opinion, is actually very critical to the Barbados experience.
No, I mean, I agree with you. And I know we're probably about to switch over topic soon, but I would love to, say in terms of what the Secretary for Culture said back then. I think implicit in her concern was, would young people want to engage, in these things, or would they be more attracted to what they're seeing on their iPhone or their tablet? And I think going forward, that is the challenge for all of us, as we try to preserve different aspects of our culture going forward. I think some of the big questions for us in terms of technology is, is technology, the solution to everything in terms of keeping our heritage alive? How do you use technology in an appropriate way, to both keep it alive for younger generations and also to bring in new audiences? And then, how can we also allow our culture to transform with technology? Because Michelle is right. I mean, culture is a current thing. Our culture is never constant. It changes based on the peoples and experiences that are coming in and out of our countries. And so I think those are some of the key things that I see going ahead that we would have to tackle in a serious way.
Absolutely. All right. And as you rightfully said, Liselle, it's time for us to switch over to Shannon. So, Shannon, the term Tech4Good seems to have multiple meanings, but generally it tends to speak to leveraging technology towards social development, social good initiatives. You seem to be of the view that the region could use the Tech4Good framework to drive government innovation. What are you proposing and how might it work?
Yes, thank you. Thank you, Michelle. Certainly, I do think so. In terms of within the Caribbean and I guess many other developing states, we have subscribed to the United Nations Development Program and specifically their Sustainable Development Goals. Now, these are very, very important for ourselves as a nation, as nations, I should say. But whether it's via CARICOM, according to the entire region itself, or individually in each state, we all know that there's been several issues with regards to implementation deficit. And this is not only because of lack of resources, but maybe even in terms of management, maybe even in terms of applying for the necessary funding itself. And once the funding has been attracted, what we've found many, many times, there's several well-meaning initiatives throughout the Caribbean, is that it's a repeating issue with either the costly outsourcing of tech services, or when those tech services are indeed outsourced, maybe to other providers outside of the region, then it results in a lack of actual development of the human resource that we have within the region. And what I'm proposing ultimately is really mimicking some of the other successful programs we've seen overseas, for instance, such as Code for America, Developers Without Borders. We know probably the more popular version, or maybe origin of it, such as Doctors Without Borders, where software developers themselves actually, instead of going off on their own and building what they think is a meaningful resolution, implementation of, let's say, a project to tackle poverty, for instance, or tackling clean energy, that these developers get connected with the necessary stakeholders, whether they be government, whether they be private sector, in order to then find out, okay, how best can we apply technology towards creating these necessary solutions? And then not only creating these solutions in terms of prototyping, but I'm talking about actually bringing it to market, making sure that it has the necessary impact by applying necessary project management and also necessary accountability systems. So this is actually something that a few other software developers and myself in Barbados have decided to come together and put together as a non-profit initiative, specifically to push it forward by working directly with government. Let's say not only government transformation, but let's say digital transformation.
Liselle?
Yeah, no, I sat here smiling because I was sort of hearing shades of the conversation we had in March about this. And Shannon, for your benefit back then, the topic I had brought forth was, what do we need for the Caribbean to go digital?
Mm-hmm.
And
perfect.
Then the discussion was about, do we have the infrastructure, do we have the policy, and do we have can we make the behavior change happen? And I think the two issues where we have, at least from my perspective, the two areas where we have the most challenge is the policy area and the behavior change. And so it's great that you're coming together with other developers to form a nonprofit to go to the government. I personally believe some of them are too conservative and hesitant to provide the latitude that you need in software development, because it's fail fast, it's test, it's iterate. I mean, that's how you do stuff to make sure that it works right. So that's one. And then also the behavior change piece. Tech4Good initiatives, they have to fill a need. And even though we might see a need, do the beneficiaries or the potential beneficiaries see enough of a need to change behavior? And I think those are the two things that we need to get a better handle on for us to see change in the Caribbean.
Oh, yes. Sorry, if I may just chime in there, and I think that's excellent points. Both very, very excellent points, Liselle. And I always like to tell persons that good software must enhance an existing behavior, existing human behavior or life practice, so it adds quality of life to its necessary stakeholders. Bad software may indeed look very pretty, may have all the necessary features, but if, as you mentioned, it does not actually influence a positive behavior change or enhance existing behaviors, then ultimately it is lacking in its implementation. And that's why it made the mention of necessary project management must be applied to this process. Now, what we've found, taking that mentality as we've gone already to some government institutions, is that we've actually spoken to them not as, oh, we're the experts and we're going to tell you how to apply technology. No, what we've come instead is, okay, we're ultimately a group of concerned citizens who see that we have something to offer, and more importantly, we can assist and we can work with these government institutions. I think that then has changed the conversation, and perhaps that's the reason why we've had many issues in terms of implementation deficit, because I'm not speaking to any particular parties, and I hope that no parties think I'm speaking to them, but I think that too often, without necessary project management structures put in place, then different goals or even desires may then start to conflict, and then ultimately run many projects off track ultimately. Now, for instance, if we look at in Barbados, for instance, we have our National Library Service, which, to be fair, in terms of its physical facilities, it's a shadow of its former self. But that need not limit its promotion and its accessibility from the public itself. We can quickly and easily utilize technology towards that end. Now, what's necessary, though, is exactly what you mentioned, the behavior change. And that requires then building trust and then starting small before going on to, hey, I want to put VR throughout the entire library, which most software developers will want to do.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
Okay, question though, because I like what you're doing and I love the concept and what it represents. But one of the things that I have recognized is that we in the region, we are not short of ideas. We are not short of innovation. And as you rightly talk about in terms of implementation deficit, but just in terms of actually getting the concepts implemented and get to the point that is viable. I mean, one of the things that has concerned me, it probably is not as prevalent as it used to be, was all of the hackathons and the coding competitions that we had, where the groups that were involved, the competitors were developing like solutions for problems that a country had. And, here it is that they developed this model, within a very short space of time, and nothing seemed to happen to them. Mm-hmm. So I'm concerned that even for your nonprofit, I don't know if it has a name at this point in time, that you're looking to partner with the government in terms of as concerned citizens and so on. But how are you going to finance some of the requirements? And we're not even getting to the point where we're talking about the actual viability, which will eventually be a concern, but just getting it from a lovely idea into something that can be implementable.
Right. Again, very, very good point and very good question. And even so sometimes they say that failure is the best teacher. And to your point in terms of developers creating solutions, just thinking, hey, I can write code, I know how to apply some level of technology, I can solve this problem. That used to be me myself, probably 4 or 5 years ago. As you may know, I initially would have developed an app to help manage diabetes and to help healthcare providers. This is before my current business. Help healthcare providers to remotely monitor their diabetic patients, or rather, as you say nowadays, patients living with diabetes. Now, initially, even though it had thousands of downloads in the Caribbean and the Middle East, and it had a small level investment, as you mentioned, ultimately, it did not mean that much. What ultimately did happen with that project, fortunately, was that I was able to have a discussion with a stakeholder, an expert in the healthcare field, who was able to see the true potential in what myself and my team were working on. And that's what's really necessary. when there's that meeting between the technical talent and the stakeholder or even the industry expert knowledge of how to apply that software technology itself. And that then can make sure that a right size technology solution is developed for the initial product itself. Let's say a MVP, as we usually call it in the technology space, a minimal viable product. Minimal viable product not being that it's limited in its functionality, but that it solves one thing and one thing very, very well, and it can be tested within a period of 1 to 3 months, according to the needs of these technical stakeholders and not according to the needs of the software developers. That, unfortunately, is where many, many hackathons have gone wrong. Now, these hackathons are very good for identifying innovations or perhaps even identifying the creation of potentially new markets. But as you mentioned, they often, but not always, but they often do not always hit the mark in terms of solving existing problems, which most stakeholders would actually be interested in. Investors would be interested in looking into the future. That's why hackathons remain very, very popular. Now, in terms of the sustainability, that's the reason why it's a nonprofit. So that then myself as an entrepreneur and then other entrepreneurs who are participating with it, we can contribute our own funds as necessary, as well as we can apply for necessary funding. But ultimately, what it comes down to is really project management, I would say, to see, okay, well, what are the resources we have at hand and what is the impact we can make? And then moving forward to that aspect, well, in that direction.
So if I might, wanted to piggyback on one thing. So a friend of mine, of mine and Michelle's, Ria Yorke, she always talks about having a Caribbean first mindset, in terms of how we approach technology, because individually our markets are quite small, and so as a region we have a much better chance of getting the funding that we need. So I would give an example. So I used to work at Green Foundation, which uses technology in international development projects, and so they may launch a pilot with as few as 15,000 people, which in the Caribbean would be a huge pilot. Mm-hmm. But you need to have a pilot of that scale, for serious funders to put their weight behind it. So in your thinking of Tech4Good, how do you see some of this being applied at a regional level? So, for example, the nonprofit you started, you've gone to talk to the government. Is the hope that you could use that sort of as a test case to expand regionally, which is where you may get more funding? Or, how are you approaching it? Because I think our size, hurts us if we try to do it country by country.
Oh yeah, I absolutely agree with you. I honestly think that, and I honestly think that anything that's approached within the Caribbean, if it's from a social good aspect, it should be focused on benefiting the entire Caribbean. I'm a strong believer in one Caribbean, and if it's from a commercial aspect, then I think that it's better to just serve the world and then recoup the profits necessary to then pay taxes within the Caribbean. Now, to your point, one of the things that I've noticed, speaking with some potential partners that we're discussing with and whatnot, is that there's actually quite a large set of funds that right now is divvied up among the Caribbean islands. More recently, for the green and blue tech sectors, our ecosystems, green in terms of renewable energy, and like green in terms of recycling, etc., and then in terms of blue, then in terms of marine technology, for instance. Now, there's already quite a number of funds allocated to such, coming from such vehicles such as the Caribbean Development Bank, the IADB, for instance. Now, the persons who some of these grants have already been applied, and some of these grants have already been awarded and whatnot. Now, then it ultimately then comes down to scaling up in terms of the actual technical capability. Now, some of those would be focused more in terms of the commercial aspects, and some of them would be focused more in terms of the social good. And the way that we've seen it ultimately is that our group itself could actually contribute towards the development of these projects in terms of manpower. Now, the way how we're doing it is a little bit different from what you may think. We could go at the route of it of saying, okay, well, we're going to divert some of our existing developer energy from our individual companies, but that's not what we're going to do. What we're actually going to do is actually utilize younger and aspiring students who want to learn how to code, who have more of the time, who are seeking to build out their professional portfolio. Maybe they've already left university, maybe they're still in university itself, who would then benefit not only from working with more experienced developers, but also working on meaningful projects. That's an approach that I don't think has been applied often enough within the Caribbean, where we see, okay, let's take an opportunity and let's scale the opportunity so that it becomes sustainable through an existing body that does not have to depend on government or regional funding. So ultimately then, regional funding will be icing on the cake, but for what we have planned, at least for the next year, and the name of the organization is barcode.network is the website, it's not absolutely necessary.
Okay. Question. Are there any projects that you all have already identified that you all will be pursuing?
Yes.
Can you share?
Yes. So specifically with regards to the National Library Service, and we're also working on one in the green tech space. This is with an undisclosed partner who hopefully we could eventually share. Personally, I will always have a soft spot for healthcare, and I've found that regionally we don't have, well, we're very, very limited in terms of the health research tools that we utilize. For instance, EpiInfo is one that is used very, very widely, for instance, by the Caribbean Public Health Alliance, but it's built by overseas developers. We in the Caribbean can do far better than that. No insult to the organization behind it. But perhaps the Caribbean Public Health Alliance doesn't know that developers would be willing to contribute towards that. And perhaps the reward does not have to be direct monetary. Maybe it could be in terms of recognition. But certainly, I would say in terms of those three areas, so the National Library Service, more in terms of public outreach, the blue tech space, green tech space, not focused on blue tech, and then also in terms of healthcare.
I mean, despite all the probing questions, I'm actually quite excited about this.
Me too. Me too.
And an example of what we could be doing in the region. So I will definitely keep an eye out, to see what barcode.net is doing over the next year. It reminds me of another platform that I learned about a couple months ago, I think it was, in St. Lucia. It's going to be an e-agriculture platform that's going to try to connect the hotel industry to farmers so that the farmers can, supply the food that the hoteliers need. And I think things like that, where we're like solving for really deep pain points, are where we need to start to really get us to the point of embracing technology in our day-to-day lives in the Caribbean.
Oh yeah, certainly. And just as a point of correction, it's barcode.network.
Oh,
I know it's a bit of a different TLD, but yeah, instead of .net, it's .network. NETWORK.
How y'all even get that? But anyway.
I'll share the secrets later.
So I have a question. So and you guys can come at it, however you want. One of the things I often joke about in the Caribbean is that we often, from a government perspective, we are often trying to provide employment rather than providing a service.
Yes.
And I mean by that, to get a process done, you might have to go to 3 offices and deal with 5 different people to get one thing done that can be done with the press of a button. And so how do you balance that tension? The fact that technology may replace some jobs and governments may be hard pressed to try to ensure that they keep employment. So how do you see that tension, and how do we mitigate that?
Oh wow, that is a heavy question. Should I take it, or
Go
would you like?
first, Shannon.
Okay. So speaking from the perspective of a software developer engineer, I would initially say that we should not be afraid of technology, much like how our current laptops or our mobile phones have facilitated us being more productive. For instance, we could be running one business on our laptop and running another business on our mobile phones, for instance, whether it's social media on the laptop and then communicating with customers on our mobile phone. So really and truly, technology itself could create a multiplying effect where we're able to serve 100 customers an hour instead of just 10 customers per hour. Unfortunately, what I'll also say is that I would admit that the reality of such is not always true. And that's because our work cultures have not always adapted and adopted the full potential of technology because of outdated management practices. I give an example. Throughout the Caribbean, there has been general reluctance to employees working from home. However, despite the fact that all the necessary technology is available, whether it's from work management systems to, well, telephony, etc. However, it's slowly been taken up in terms of implementation. It's slowly been taken up by some companies simply because traffic is so bad in some countries, such as in terms of some of my friends in Trinidad, for instance. They mentioned that it takes them 3 to 4 hours just to get to work, such that it makes more sense for them to just start working by the time they would have normally started traveling. Ultimately, they get more done for the actual business itself. So there's certain days out of the week that they can work from home. You know, they come to that compromise with the management itself. But we need not wait until our facilities, our outdated systems ultimately fail us, and we could and we should seek to then, okay, how can we start preparing our workforce, not only through training but also through implementation, to see, okay, how can we start this multiplying effect that I look forward to in terms of technology, including AI and automation. What it ultimately comes down to is not necessarily only the retraining of the staff, I find, but also the ability for management to really understand what is true worker productivity within their organizations, something that I think has been lacking a lot in many public institutions, such as government.
I definitely agree. I mean, I think we probably need to wrap up. So I'll just basically say on your question, Liselle, is that ultimately I think we really we are not accepting the fact that the work paradigm should be changing. It has changed, but we are holding on to systems where we are looking at how many people we employ, as you rightfully say, versus the quality of the service and efficiencies that could be implemented, which do not necessarily require more people, may even work better with less or with fewer people than what traditionally would obtain. But I think because though we are so hung up on trying to maintain what we perceive as the status quo, we don't appreciate the opportunities that can emerge. And sometimes, it's almost as if you have to let go of one thing to see the benefits of another. And I think that is the challenge that we are grappling with in the region.
Absolutely. Well said.
Agreed.
All right, folks, I think we need to wrap up. We kind of getting to the point where, as much as we can probably continue and flesh out a number of other issues, I think our audience may begin to tire a little bit. So I guess thank you so much. I just want to say, just in terms of my little wrap up, and then certainly Liselle, and then Shannon, and then I'll just close everything off. I think one of the things that, just going back to the whole technology and culture, I think sometimes what we fail to realize is that, or appreciate, is that technology is a tool, and we decide how best it can be used in any aspect of our lives. So I think even for culture, we can try to use technology to help us to preserve some of the cultural elements and to figure out ways to make it more attractive. So when Shannon was talking about the Barbados landship and the steel donkey and some of those aspects of the Bajan culture that and heritage that people may not be paying as much attention to, the question one might be able to ask is, how can we use technology to draw more attention to it, to make it interesting, to bring it back into the fore? And I think sometimes that, we feel as if we are being enslaved by technology, and when it really should be the other way around. I guess certainly for Technology for Good and barcode.net, Shannon, I'm also quite excited about that and looking forward to hearing good things, and hopefully we can talk more about it, once probably the projects begin to unfold, and maybe there may be scope. I guess currently the focus might be on Barbados, but maybe there might be opportunities for either barcode.net to spread to other islands, or other islands collaborate with that entity as well.
Oh yes. Certainly. Actually, what we've been doing is we've been talking with other developer communities regionally who've been doing some excellent work. For instance, in Jamaica, there's Slash Roots, and then there's also Next Gen Creators in Jamaica. I know there are a couple unnamed developer groups in Trinidad, as well as in Guyana. There's version 75. Each of those developer communities is really an inspiration for us, and we've already been discussing and finding ways to say, okay, how can we push digital transformation throughout the region together?
Excellent.
And I just want to say just a little bit in terms of the technology and culture. Despite the onslaught that the culture secretary faced, I mean, her team actually does a lot already to promote the culture on social media. So I don't want her to be seen at all as if she's just trying to hold on to the past and not looking, forward. And so when I first saw the furor, as I said, about her comments, I felt that people were missing the nuance in that. And so I think it's a conversation that we have to continue. Again, for me, the big things are, how do we use it as a gateway to bring people in so that they can actually taste, feel, and eat, and the experiences? How do we use it to preserve these traditions so that they can be passed on? And how do we use them as educational tools so that our young people can grow up with an appreciation for the traditions that have helped to shape our countries today?
Absolutely.
All right, folks, thank you so much. And we're coming to the end of the July 2019 community chat.
Thank you, Michelle.
Thank you very much, Michelle.
That's it for today's episode. Thank you so much for listening to the ICT Pulse podcast. You can find links to some of the things we talked about on our website, ict-pulse.com. If you like this episode, please show your support by leaving us a review on iTunes, as it will help others find the show. You can email us at info@ict-pulse.com or drop us a note on our Facebook page, facebook.com/ICTPulse, or via Twitter @ICTPulse. We hope you'll join us again for our next episode. Take care.